Welcome to r/RedditRevenge. This is a story of someone getting back at someone with revenge after being wronged. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel and for so many likes. My dad gets accused, almost gets fired. He finds serious evidence that the lady that accused him and her lover have been frauding the company. The second story, the company didn't pay me for 6 months. I got $20,000 out of it and got the company shut down. The third story, leader left the company because he lied to my brother. Today's first story is flirting, more like your downfall. My dad has worked at an architectural firm for about 20 years and has never had a problem with anyone. He's the company's dream employee, so much so that when he said he was leaving to another company, they offered him double his pay, which started off as a lot, to stay with them. He, of course, accepted. Recently, the company has driven to become more international, hiring many people from Iraq and Iran, Persia and India, to the point where only 1 in 10 employees were white. All these people were women. For my dad, this was no problem at all, as he's not racist or sexist. Until one employee was hired. We will call her Miss K. Miss K was hired as a sort of manager HR person, managing the office and helping increase employees' productivity and help them get along. The chain of command at my dad's office is complicated, but essentially, he had authority over everyone in the office except Miss K. His company has many international offices, and he's the boss of one of them. They got along fine for a few months, staying separate, working on their own things, until the incident. Now, my dad is married with me as his child. He's Christian and would never imagine being with another woman. He makes this abundantly clear at his office, and everyone knows this. But one day, my dad was trying to be nice to everyone, and he gave Miss K a pat on the back and says, "Great job today, Miss K." Not a rub, not anything sexually inappropriate for the workplace, or with any hidden meaning behind it. He walks away, thinking everything is fine and he's done a good deed. Later on in the day, he gets called into the boss's office. He thinks he's about to be congratulated or even given a promotion, as he's just completed a $36 billion, yes, billion-dollar project with the military that's been in the works for over a decade. But no, his boss tells him that he's been put on probation for flirting with Miss K. Not sure if this is the exact term, sorry. He's astounded. He's so shocked that he doesn't even realize what he did was wrong. What he does realize is that Miss K wants his job. His boss tells him that this could be a firing offense if it happens again, and my dad, being the reasonable employee he is, agrees and says it will never happen again. My dad does not believe in revenge because he says it becomes a war in which your neighbor can always be worse than you. He believes in justice, which he constantly tells me. Now comes the good part. My dad has worked at the company for 20 years, aka he has connections with the higher-ups, aka the founder and CEO of the company, who he goes out to lunch with once a week. On this weekly lunch, my dad explains his situation, and the CEO says he can't do anything without proof. So guess what my dad does? He gets proof. While my dad is on probation, he has to spend half his day at the office and the other half at a rehab center. Yes, it was actually called a rehab center. The half he spends away, Miss K is in charge. The half he spends at the office is still with Miss K, so he decides to watch her like a hawk. I know it may seem a little creepy, but by this time my dad was in need of some sweet poetic justice. He watches what time she arrives and when she leaves, how often she works, and when she leaves for a lunch break. One thing he noticed was that she and one other employee always took their break at the same time and left and arrived at the same time. When she was making her rounds of the office, she took an extra amount of time checking on him. We will call him Mr. K for irony's sake. Company policy dictates that no inter-office relationship can be unannounced. Basically, if you have a relationship, you have to tell the boss. This is for reasons unknown to me, but my best guess is so there are no distractions or mistakes in a $36 billion project. My dad concluded they were having a relationship. He didn't have enough evidence to prove it, but he had enough to at least start an investigation. This is bullet 1. Bullet 2 is the fact that Miss K was quite the naughty girl. My dad has access to the entire office's Wi-Fi and internet history to manage and block not safe for work sites recently. A mobile device started showing up, attempting to view these blocked sites. Eventually, this person found a site that was unblocked and spent quite a while on there. My dad found out the mobile device belonged to Miss K because her relief break was at the exact same time as this mobile device was on these sites. Bullet 3. Another part of Miss K's job was to measure employees' progress in a day and report to a boss higher than my dad. My dad watched Mr. K and realized Miss K had boosted his numbers significantly, so much so that while Mr. K was on break, it showed him working. This was the thing that really got Miss K and Mr. K fired. What they did was close to frauding the company, and the company could personally sue them. My dad presented the evidence to the CEO and got the sweet satisfaction of the CEO saying the proof was enough to get them fired and more. My dad never intended to harm or mar Mr. K's career, but when you commit fraud with someone, you kind of deserve it. Mr. and Miss K were both fired, and Miss K was sued for the entire profit Mr. K had made during his time there, when Miss K was there at the same time. The next story is, don't pay me for half a year? Okay, enjoy being $20,000 in debt and being out of a job. Okay, so I had this really nice lady as a boss in a sales job. I'm in a different job now. She was the sweetest soul ever and would always get us coffee when we got to work. She had a heart of pure gold, but that wasn't enough for the leech of a corporation the business I used to work at was. They were the most scummy people on earth. Just imagine Mr. Krabs' money obsession on steroids. Half of my workforce got fired due to budget cuts. Thankfully not me, because I was a pretty hard worker. But then I got a new boss, and oh boy was he a nightmare. He made us get to work an hour earlier, so we could get ahead of our schedule. He also made us stay behind late for the same reason. I barely ever got any free time to myself, because I was rotting in a tomb that my new boss called an office. To be honest, he made me want to quit, and also made me wonder, what the heck am I doing here? I could be outside, but instead I'm sat in front of a monitor making some sales. What has my life become? He made me hate my life. Then, they got really scummy. They got rid of another half of our workforce again, because of their budget cuts. They fired my best friend, who I made a pact with to always have the same job as her. She got a job as a cashier because nobody was hiring. I couldn't leave my job and I felt trapped. But can I tell you what was really scummy? Because there was only 25% of our workforce left, they were making me do 2 different jobs and an extra 3 hours because they couldn't afford to keep their precious workers in the industry. My boss started to treat me like SH with a cherry on top and make sexist jokes. It was so misogynistic and so rude that I just couldn't take it anymore. I went into a mental breakdown at home and cried myself to sleep for a week. The effing boss also had the nerve to not pay me for 6 months. He came up with excuses like, we have a few setbacks, we'll give it to you next month, and oh, we're sorry, we're all tied up at the moment. I had rent to pay, GD. I got paid roughly $3,300 a month, but after that, I had to rely on my parents to help me pay my rent, buy my food, get transport through trains, etc. This isn't directed towards the boss, but towards the entire GD company. I'm not naming any names, but they're the worst corporation ever. So I was slaving away at my job again, and my boss told me they were firing me because I was lacking schedule completion or whatever. I was peeved. It was so overwhelming and infuriating. F these guys. Now for the revenge. I had no idea why I didn't do this before, but I had gotten in contact with a lawyer. He understood it all and was in my favor, and he agreed to take on the case. We had gathered every sample of evidence on how I was unpaid for the past 6 months and had to live off of my parents. It was horrible. I felt so bad. It felt like I was stealing from them. We were certain we were going to win the court case. We had every bit of evidence to get my money back. Court trial day. I was not suing my SH boss, but the CEO of the company for around $20,000. The CEO tried to bribe the judge with $500, but it didn't work. The judge apparently passed it off as, sure dude, I'll definitely be in your favor. My lawyer is friends with the judge, surprisingly enough, and the judge told him after the trial case. Okay, so judge starts talking, yada yada yada. Then he asked the CEO to give evidence that they have paid me. They had none. They didn't even think about forging documents. The judge was displeased and went on to me and my lawyer. The judge told me to show evidence, and I did. I whipped out 10 pages of documents with unpaid bills. The judge had all the evidence he needed, and it went in my favor. This went over the local news, and I got $20,000 in return. Thanks so much, CEO. Really appreciate it. I bought a used car and paid off the next few months of my rent, all thanks to the CEO. The CEO's company died and went out of business because clients heard about my court case, and they were disgusted that a company would do that. The company went out of business because nobody would buy from them, and they had a bad reputation in general. I, however, got my PhD in English, and I'm now an author for a book series. And the last story is, take 'em slow and steady. Let's set out the players. Me, David. I'm Tony's brother. Tony owns a medical IT company. Let's call them IT Docs. Well, IT Docs was just starting quite a few years ago when it secured what was to be one of its biggest contracts ever. It was a major milestone for Tony and IT Docs. However, Tony needed some assistance to properly execute on the contract. Tony approached another company called Making This Up, BSOB IT, ran by a Mr. Liar. Tony and Mr. Liar had several meetings in which Tony outlined the contract and his plan of action and where he'd need Mr. Liar's assistance. Mr. Liar listened and verbally committed that BSOB IT could help and would be more than happy to help, but needed more information. Tony gave Mr. Liar the information and thought everything was just fine. When one day the doctors often called up my brother Tony and said they'd no longer be interested in the contract and had just signed a deal with BSOB IT. Tony was peeved. He came to me for advice. I'm not sure if this was good advice, but the way I saw it is he was just a lightweight in the game and got shafted by a heavyweight. If he went after BSOB IT and Mr. Liar today, it could massively backfire. I told Tony he needs to toss this way in the bin and focus on growth, not revenge. He then said to me, "You're right, but one day, I'll get them." Tony went on to grow IT Docs into a thriving company. When one day he had become so large, he decided the most economical way to grow was to acquire his competition, and he set his eyes on BSOB IT. In that time, BSOB IT had lost several key contracts and was quite a bit smaller than it was since the days of the meeting between Mr. Liar and my brother Tony. However, my brother decided to acquire this company. I suspect a lot of it had to do with the righting the injustice of yesterday tomorrow type deal. Now, Tony was very smart in his approach. He put one of his most senior partners to be the face of the acquisition. He even went so far as to accidentally remove his picture from the CEO and founder portion of his company's website. He figured that no way would Mr. Liar remember IT Docs and wouldn't suspect a thing. Well, he successfully bought out BSOB IT, and Mr. Liar was still their CEO. However, there's no need for two CEOs. Now, is there? Tony invited Mr. Liar to discuss the role that he'll play with IT Docs. I guess Mr. Liar assumed that he'd retain his position and benefits, but there was no need for two CEOs. So as my brother said, Mr. Liar and him went over how the company would be structured, and then Tony asked Mr. Liar, "Where do you see yourself in this organization?" Now, those meetings lasted for a while, over the course of several days. What struck Tony is Mr. Liar never remembered their first encounters, and how Mr. Liar stole his client. Then in the final meeting, something clicked, and Mr. Liar said to my brother, "Didn't we do business together before?" My brother smirked and said, "Yes, we have." Mr. Liar said, "I can't seem to recall, do you?" My brother smiled back and said, "Do you remember when in year XXXX, a small startup medical IT company came to your company for assistance with a Mr. X doctor's office?" Mr. Liar is getting uncomfortable in his chair, and he said, "Yeah." My brother went on to say, "Well, we never did much business together, because after we discussed being partners, that doctor's office called me up and said they were no longer doing business with me and have chosen your company over mine, even though you didn't even see the opportunity until I asked for your company partnership on the deal." Mr. Liar was still, pretty sure he already knew what was up. My brother then said, "Now, Mr. Liar, my partners in senior management have discussed what role and what skill set you bring to the table. We simply do not see the need for your continued service in our organization and will be ending your employment with us." With that, Mr. Liar left the company for good. Mr. Liar really didn't bring anything to the table, besides being a businessman with questionable ethics and with extremely outdated IT skills. Tony said something like the guy got paid 6 months' salary and his share in the old company. He didn't get completely hosed, as he couldn't due to contracts and stuff, but he was no longer in charge of his baby anymore. I hope you love these stories. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to know when the new video comes out.